Kia ora, I'm Erica Wilkinson, New Zealand's Acting Threatened Species Ambassador, and this is the Doc Sounds of Science podcast. Every episode, we talk about work being done behind the scenes by Doc's technical experts, scientists, rangers, and the experts in between. Kia ora, ko Erica Wilkinson tēnei. He kona I purangi tēnei, e pā ana ki ngā Sounds of Science. Today we're diving into the wild world of wildlife trade with one of DOC's endangered species officers, Avi Narula. Kia ora, Avi.
Tēnā koe, Erica. Ko Avi Narula tōku ingoa. My name is Avi Narula, and I work for the Department of Conservation CITES team.
Kia ora. Today, Avi and I are talking about CITES, which is an international agreement prohibiting the import and export of endangered animals and plants. Now, what is a CITES officer, and also why is a CITES officer? Well, it's not super easy to explain, so I'm going to let you do it. Why don't you tell us about your role?
Yeah, kia ora, Erica. Thanks. So my role sits within the National Compliance Team at the Department of Conservation. We're a small unit of 5 people within the CITES team. And as I'll explain in a bit, we constitute the New Zealand CITES Management Authority. I guess the core role is really to facilitate the legal trade or the international cross-border movement of endangered and threatened species that are listed on CITES. And equally, any trade or international cross-border movement that is illegal, we manage those cases. We follow up and in some occasions we enforce or further enforce the illegal trade. And I guess the second point to what I do as a CITES officer or endangered species officer is work really, really closely with our partner border agencies, so the New Zealand Customs Service and Ministry for Primary Industries, particularly the biosecurity team.
Cross-border movement and working with customs sounds like border control. How is DOC's role different, and why DOC?
Yeah, so it's an element of border control. Why DOC? Well, DOC, we're sort of a 3-pronged attack, if you like, when it comes to controlling our border for legal and illegal wildlife trade. So that's where they come into it. And under our Trade and Endangered Species Act, which is the New Zealand legislation that we operate under to enforce and to implement CITES, New Zealand Customs officers and MPI biosecurity officers are also appointed and have the powers under that act. So hence why we work really closely. There's 3 of us.
So why is CITES important, high-level view?
So CITES is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, in other words, plants and animals. It's an international treaty that came into effect in 1975, and it accords protection to over 38,000 species of those which are affected by trade. And we'll use the word trade quite a lot. It means international cross-border movement. The way it works is CITES is your framework for guidance or global guidance of how to regulate and control the movement of animals and plants that are protected. And New Zealand has to do their part, and every country that is signed to CITES does their part. It's really important for us to be an active part of that because we're helping the global efforts to protect all those species that are affected in the wild because of trade.
So without an agreement like CITES, what happens?
Yeah, so without the international agreement like CITES in the world, what you'd see happen is you'd see a significant decline in wild populations of many species of plants and animals that are affected by what we know as trade. You take your elephants and rhinos, for example, that are illegally poached for things like ivory or rhino horn and sent and smuggled or trafficked illegally. You take amazing animals like pangolins, and they're illegally poached and their scales are trafficked over to Southeast Asian countries in huge amounts, like tons. And that's what's causing significant decline in these species in the wild. So you would see animals go extinct because of, the trade in either live specimens or their parts or derivatives, really. So that's just the reality of it. Without CITES, you'd start to see a lot of these species we know fall over. And the worst part is that CITES, I think, it's it's even more important because if you protect iconic species or any species of plant and animal, the rest of the ecosystems that they live in are also protected. I always give the analogy: you protect the elephant, you protect the rhino, and you protect everything in between that species or that animal and a dung beetle. Without the elephant, the dung beetle don't survive.
And how did you get into this kind of work? It's very specific.
How did I get into it? I've had a very long tenure in the wildlife and conservation industry, if you will. Got an extensive experience in the captive animal industry within the zoological world. I've had a bit of marine mammal rescue, some animal and wildlife control work up in Canada as well, and some educational outreach work in other places around the world, including the US and South Africa.
And I hear that you've worked with big cats.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly my passion is big cats, and I have been very grateful to be able to work with a variety of species of big cats, both here in New Zealand, but also in South Africa and the US as well.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in the mighty Tamaki Makaurau, out east, in East Auckland, and that's where I went through school and was, I guess, born and bred there. And as a little old Kiwi boy, just having a huge passion for wildlife from as early as I can remember, about 3 years of age, watching every single documentary I could, mostly on big cats, and having very supportive parents as well to follow my passion and my dream. And I'd waver between wanting to become a veterinarian to just working with animals to going out into the wild and living out in the bush or doing something what we call in situ conservation now.
Are your family conservationists as well?
Yeah, I think they've grown to be. I'm originally, my ethnic origins are Indian. And so if you think about some of the traditional sense of Indian families, I might get my hand slapped if my mum hears me say this, but they growing up, the traditional senses that you need to become a doctor or a lawyer or some sort of a great career. But when I remember telling my grandmother about the age of 12 that I wanted to work with animals, and I know her and my mum was like, what? My dad has always been supportive, but yeah, and as they've seen what I've been able to do and the experiences I've had and seen this, what I deem to be success, and I've been able to share that passion, they've certainly grown into their own conservationists and advocates, and they tell their friends and extended family, if you will. But yeah, that's sort of from a very early age, I've always wanted to work with animals in some capacity.
What do you like most about your work?
Yeah, the parts that are really gratifying and rewarding is obviously being able to make a positive difference, or feel like we are here in New Zealand, and sort of flying the flag for protected species globally, but also being able to fly the flag in terms of being ambassadors or advocates for international species for Kiwis. So yes, enforcing and penalising illegal trade into New Zealand is certainly a way that we do that, but more so it's the proactiveness that we try and have within the CITES team and within the amount of outreach that we're trying to do now more than ever to try and get the message out there about the plight of animals in an international sense, and why that is, especially when it relates to CITES and the trade in certain animals. Most people know about the elephant ivory industry and how horrific that is, and elephants are declining, and same with rhino, for example. They're kind of your marquee species. And so you can lead off the back of them, of those species as being iconic flagship species.
So you mentioned pangolins get trafficked so much. So why them? And then something else like orchids, you wouldn't consider that those two are the main things we're after? Yeah,
pangolins, the most cutest, weirdest looking animal, the most the most illegally trafficked mammal on the planet. They are unfortunately trafficked. Their scales are predominantly, the animals are poached in the wild or taken from the wild, if you will. Then killed, and then their scales are sent over to Southeast Asia and to China to be used in traditional Chinese medicines. That's still going on for that very reason. There are some other horrific things that I've heard about that. Pangolins are put into soups and fetuses, etc. But for the most part, it's their scales that are used.
And orchids?
Yeah, same thing. Orchids take a species known as Dendrobium, a genus known as Dendrobium, for example, are used in their raw form in Chinese, traditional Chinese medicine and Southeast Asian medicine for, I guess they have traditional or some sort of medicinal value to them. And so they're either used in teas or ground down and used in medicines, etc.
What do you think is the biggest misconception people have about CITES work?
I think there's probably two that are the two biggest misconceptions that I've seen in the last 4 years, almost 4 years of being with the team and in this world, is that leather watch strap that's made out of alligator skin, for example. No one connects the fact that actually came from a real-life alligator, or the shoes that are made out of reptile skin actually came from a live reticulated python, or what's in my medicine, in my traditional Chinese medicine, actually came from a real animal. So there's the connectiveness to the item or the product in your hand, the actual animal. That's one of the biggest misconceptions people see, that I'm seeing, that people just don't realise. And then the other one probably is that despite the provenance of your item, so if you've got a very, very old piano with ivory keys, because elephants and ivory is listed on the convention, let's say you buy something from a store that you've legally purchased, you've bought it in good faith. If it's comprised of a species that is protected by CITES, it still needs or has some form of regulation or control to it, so it still needs a permit. So many cases people go overseas or purchase something from overseas and they bring it into New Zealand or import it in, and they say, well, I bought it at a store, or it's been in the family for 400 years, or it's, I purchased this from an auction. Well, yes, that's fine, but without a permit, we can't prove its provenance and that it was legally purchased or harvested or sustainably, bought, or like I said, harvested. So, yeah, we talk about it with a lot of people like it. A permit is like a passport for your specimens, and that just relates back to how CITES works. Really, is it's on a licensing and a licensing system, a permitting system.
Okay, so I can bring grandma's piano in, but I need a permit, the piece of paper that goes with it. Yeah,
so that actually states, yes, it's very, very old. It predates the convention. It predates 1975 when the convention came into effect, but it's something official that's come from CITES authority to CITES authority to say, or into a country to say, yes, that is very, very old.
Okay.
It's very similar to us going to an international border, and I like to use this analogy for people to get their head around it. Me and you are all well and good. We're great law-abiding citizens, but if I don't have a passport with me when I go to an international border to prove who I am, then I'm not getting into that country. And the same thing goes with any items or goods or even, whether it's manufactured or unmanufactured items. So you need to be able to prove provenance and legal harvesting or sustainable acquisition.
That's such a good analogy. I feel like when you're talking about the buying it from a real shop as well, I think a lot of the time people think of CITES as what you can bring on a plane, but is it online shopping as well? What kind of stuff has been an online shopping problem for you?
Yeah, actually, so before I maybe tackle the online shopping, which has become even more evident during the last 2 years of the pandemic, but our three main pathways is certainly a passenger pathway through international airports. We've got the mail pathway, and we've also got the cargo pathway. Those are the three main channels that people can import things or items or goods that have potentially CITES species in them. Yeah, you're right. Just so it's not just bringing something in on you through an airport, but certainly through online shopping. Recently, we've seen a huge increase in that with the pandemic and no one being able to travel anywhere. So, it's really just, I guess what we've found is people are just buying things off your Amazons, your eBays, and other international websites. thinking it's fine and legit and legal to do so, and it should have no issues coming into New Zealand, without thinking further that, hey, actually what I'm buying may be an endangered or a protected species. I might have to do a bit more thinking and digging into what else is needed to legally import it into New Zealand. A lot of people have the misconception that, I bought something legally in a country, so that should be fine. I can just bring it into New Zealand, no dramas. But as soon as that item or those goods get on a plane and come across an international border, there are other rules and regulations that do apply, and in this case, CITES, for any protected animal or plant.
There are 3 different types of passenger, mail, and cargo. People must try and bring in weird stuff through all of those things. Can you give me a few examples of what you've come across?
Oh, gosh. Look, cargo, we see, at the moment, in recent times, we're seeing a lot of household moves back to New Zealand after the pandemic, but obviously during the pandemic, people wanted to get out and get back home. And people have acquired all sorts of weird, wonderful taxidermied, trophies of skins of mammals, or really old, like shells they've collected that are potentially listed on CITES, old turtle shells. And through the mail pathway, we're seeing weird and wonderful, it's just hobbyists through the mail pathway, people wanting to see weird curiosities online and going, oh, that would be cool to sit on the mantelpiece. So big owls, like great grey owls that are a full taxidermy great grey owl coming in, and coming in from weird and wonderful places like Russia and European countries. I've seen a saiga antelope. We saw a whip, almost like a bull whip with the hoof of a saiga antelope come in a little while ago, which was bizarre as well. We've seen knives that have handles made of hippo tusks, or I'm trying to think of what other species it came from, but things like that have come through. We've had all sorts crocodile skin and really strange looking purses and products manufactured out of python skin. Some of the musical instruments that have the Chinese musical instruments that have called an erhu, they have python skin as the part that makes up the drum. So there's honestly all sorts that come through that are very different. Yeah, it's every day's slightly different.
Keeps it interesting. And what happens when something that comes across is a taonga? What do you do then?
Yeah, it's a highly sensitive subject. Depends the taonga's Māori, or if it's, I guess taonga to different cultures is many different things, and something that we talk about quite a lot with our border agency partners and amongst the team, and I guess, and something that is probably developing more and more as we move more and more into that space around active protection of especially Māori taonga. To boil it back a little bit, under CITES framework, there is no cultural bias to any culture. So, and the items that essentially seen as taonga to that culture. So if you think of First Nations people of Canada or Native Americans, eagle feathers, products made out of grizzly bear or black bear are considered taonga. Fijian tambua, which is necklaces made out of sperm whale teeth, are taonga. And rightfully so for other cultural or cultures, if you will. With New Zealand taonga, particularly, we're talking about things like whalebone, large whalebone that's carved into necklaces, passed down through iwi, generation of generation within iwi. Also things like kakapo or kia feathers or kurawais, things like that. Under the Trade and Endangered Species Act here in New Zealand, we have an exemption for items or goods that were acquired originally in New Zealand. So, for example, someone takes a whalebone carving out of New Zealand to another country and brings it back into New Zealand and doesn't have any permits. When we implement CITES in New Zealand, we use the Trade and Endangered Species Act. It's our legislation. And under our legislation, we have an exemption for New Zealand acquired items, so they can come in without exempt from permitting. So we try and facilitate I guess, that through that part, or look at it that lens. But unfortunately, for other species, like other taonga, if you will, like Fijian tambua, which is a big one that we see come through. Fijian nationals will bring that in if they're visiting, or if they live here, they bring it back from Fiji. And these are necklaces that have been family heirlooms for years within their family. And it's always a tough one for us, but if they come in without paperwork or their appropriate CITES documentation, then unfortunately under the Act, it's pretty black and white there. They have to be seized and are forfeit to the Crown. And that's always a difficult one. But at the end of the day, it is a sperm whale tooth. So, yeah, that is what happens. That's why it's so important for us. And we've done a bit of outreach recently, I should say last year, the year before, I forget now. But in the last couple of years, we've done outreach over to Fiji and asking the Fijian CITES authorities to get out and at least see if they can get the word out around, if you're taking tambua overseas, especially to New Zealand, please get a permit.
So let's really emphasize, any animal and plant products you're trying to bring out, just get a permit, yeah?
Just check, because, you just always check before you travel. Because by the time you do start travelling and get to New Zealand, it's already too late, because we cannot accept retrospectively issued permits. So you must always check. If you're thinking of buying something online, if you're going to a tropical destination, one of the Pacific Island countries, and you decide to pick up a nautilus shell or some giant clams off the beach to bring back, as a souvenir, or, product made out of turtle shell, you need to make sure you're thinking about, do I need a permit, or do I need something to help me legally bring that into New Zealand?
Or if you're like my sister, sand in a bottle.
Sand in a bottle, yep.
And your team have been working with iwi here in Aotearoa to ensure iwi or ropu travelling overseas for cultural performance reasons know that they need to check before travelling with taonga. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. And I guess in our efforts to have active protection for Māori taonga, Aotearoa's taonga, we and it's ramping up. Actually, our outreach efforts will be ramping up in that space with travelling overseas with taonga. But we have done a bit of outreach initially, and we started to ramp that up. And of course, then COVID hit, so then everything got kind of shelved a little bit because no one could travel overseas. But yes, what our advice is to any iwi that are travelling overseas with things like Māori taonga, in the form of whalebone carvings, even if it's worn around you, is that you need to make sure that you check in with us, or Te Papa Te Whai, Department of Conservation, the CITES Management Authority here, just to make sure that you have the right documentation you need when going to another country, because unfortunately, if it gets seized, and then if it's whalebone and it doesn't have the appropriate documentation in another country and it is seized, there's not much we can do to get that precious taonga back. One of the cool things we did was help facilitate legal entry of New Zealand Olympic teams Kurawai recently to the Winter Olympics and to the Summer Olympics, and we'll have to probably do it again now, obviously, with the Commonwealth Games coming up. So that's really cool, being a part of that process to make sure that the team's Kurawai for the flag bearers gets to go over and goes over there legally.
Oh, that is a cool job. Can you tell us about some of the sad things that you've had to seize?
Oh, the hard ones that you need to try and compartmentalize your emotions, and it's hard to do, we're all humans, is people's family heirlooms. Those are always the tough ones, whether it's Appendix 1 highly protected sea turtle shell that's been in a family for years, coming across from the islands, and it means so much to them. But under the Act here, if it comes, and all sea turtles are really highly protected. They're in Appendix 1, the same as elephants and rhinos. And so you definitely need to get the right permits. And if it arrives here without those, they are seized. So yeah, I know personally I've had to seize a couple of family heirlooms that were turtle shells. They were just real heartbreaking. It's always difficult with tambua, which is the sperm whale teeth necklaces. The good part is we don't dispose of those, and they at periodic points, we repatriate that all back to the Fijian government. Yeah, we've had a lot of people, unfortunately, get really upset with us on the phone, because of their items, and there's just not a heck of a lot we can do in terms of our legislation or leniency. The other things that have been people's really high-end crocodile skins that they've had, or jackets and shoes and belts, all manufactured out of crocodilia, so alligator or crocodile leather. So yeah, there's been a huge variety. Just giving you a bit of a snapshot of the types of things that really are difficult.
You've had such an incredible career, doing so many different things. If you think of your doc career, what's been your best day at work? Can you think of one?
The one that I think will stand out for me, just based off your question, is we got intel and we got a report through from New Zealand Customs to say that two huge crates of ivory had been seized that have come in through the cargo pathway without any documentation whatsoever. And it just said ivory. And that obviously all got our alarm bells ringing, if you like, and red flags up. And so we promptly went out to the facility that they were all being detained at, and managed to do, this was a really cool one because I hadn't probably done a co-joint inspection with New Zealand Customs officers and MPI biosecurity officers and us all at the same time. And so when we got there, we opened up these gigantic crates, and even in so within a couple of days till we got there, I had spoken to the importer who had just bought this ivory from a friend, quote unquote, in the US, who had closed down an art gallery and just shipped all these highly worked carved ivory items. And I knew that in the state of California, where they had come from, there's a total ban on ivory, both importing and exporting. And so, there was alarm bells ringing. He did mention that it was mammoth ivory as well, which obviously mammoths being extinct, they're not listed on the convention. They're not protected by CITES, being an extinct species. So again, going into this inspection, knowing that I have previous knowledge that a lot of times when people trade in mammoth ivory, which, the permafrost is melting up in parts of Russia and Siberia and that sort of Arctic area that's circle there, and you are seeing a lot of evidence of mammoth now. But there have been lots of reports around the world that elephant ivory, modern day elephant ivory, is also smuggled and thrown in and made to look like mammoth ivory, right? So you're going into this inspection with the other border agencies knowing all of this. So that's the type of thing you're like, this is quite significant, or could be. So, having to methodically unwrap a lot of these tusks that were sometimes some of the tusks that we were seeing were highly worked, all with sort of Chinese cultural traditional carvings in them, actually. And they were highly worked, and the price tags on some of these were, 140 to 300,000 US dollars. You're thinking, holy smokes. Yeah, like I said, holding these, unwrapping all of, there was about almost 80 pieces from, 30 centimeters long to well over 1.5 meters. And sure enough, some of them were very evidently mammoth, just based on the physical characteristics of the tusks and these long, curved, sweeping tusks that are very indicative of mammoth. But others, you just, this is where we're having to put all our ID skills to the test of how do you distinguish between elephant ivory and mammoth ivory. And there's some key identifying characteristics that you look at. Schrager lines, and you look at characteristics of the ivory, specifically Schrager lines. And when you don't have any evidence of that, you're scratching your head going, we've gone through quite a few, and there's other diagnostic ways to ID mammoth versus elephant. We ended up having to send this all for further DNA sampling. So we managed to use the services of ESR here in Auckland for DNA sampling, which was quite amazing, actually, to see how all that process works and the methods to be able to do that. And we also did some radiocarbon dating as well. And we did a fair few samples as a subset of these 80 odd items to just sort of narrow down if anything to come back as modern day elephant in terms of the genome sequencing, the DNA sequencing. Lo and behold, and this is sort of the best day, is that I was actually holding items that were over 40,000 years old in my hand. And that's just a mind-blowing thing. So, it didn't work out to be modern-day elephant. It was all mammoth in the end. And so it was released to the importer, and no CITES documentation was required. However, just the fact of knowing that potentially there's elephant ivory, smuggled in there, and then the fact that I'm holding something that's huge and it came from a mammoth was just like mind-blowing. Don't say the best day, for sure. It was also the strangest day, I'd say. One of the strangest anyway.
I mean, it's surely it's up there, even with a job like yours. It's incredible that you did DNA sampling in order to test, like how intensive.
Yeah, and carbon dating. It's quite impressive to see how you can use a lot of those wildlife forensic methods to help with CITES operations in New Zealand.
Okay, so we've got a scenario for you. You're at a school. I know you've said you do a lot of education outreach. Maybe they're about 11 years old. You're trying to get them into conservation. What is the coolest conservation fact that you can think of to hook them on your mahi?
Oh my gosh, Erica, there's so many. Animals and plants are just the most amazing things. Way better than humans, aren't they? In terms of facts, I'd say, some of the ones, if you're talking about young minds and getting them hooked on the mahi that we do, talking about things like, look, gorillas are 8 times stronger than us. If you think about the strongest human and then think about an adult male gorilla and it's 8 times stronger than you, or a cheetah can run as fast as your car goes on the motorway, at 120 kilometers an hour, or sperm whales, they sleep vertically. Who knew? And if you're into insects, then you've got the Queen's Alexandra birdwing butterfly, and that has a wingspan the size of a medium-sized bird. The wingspan's about 25 centimeters long. So, or if you like birds of prey, then marshall eagles from Africa, if they landed on your head and used their talons, they'd squash your head like a watermelon. Big cats, some of them purr and some of them roar, but you can't do both. So, you think about a mountain lion or a puma, they purr, they can't roar. They're known as a lesser cat or a lesser big cat, whereas if you look at a lion or a tiger, they roar. They can't purr.
That's fascinating.
Just cool things like that allow kids to understand and be inspired by how amazing, and these are obviously all CITES listed species, but how amazing animals can be. They just blow you away, and that's enough to inspire young minds to persevere and to pursue a career in conservation.
Absolutely, and it's so important to hook people in with a nature fact like that. And as soon as you get them to care, they're in. They're not going to try and bring in ivory.
No, or something that they shouldn't be, or at least check before they do, right?
So have you ever had a moment in the field where everything just went wrong?
Yeah. Yep. Quite a few of them, actually. If I think about some previous roles, one of the roles that I had previously when I lived in Canada was as an animal and wildlife control officer in the city of London in Ontario. And that was also a role you just knew. It was like a box of chocolates. You never knew what you're going to get. And this day happened to be a good old cold Canadian winter's day, minus 25 degrees. And we talk about cold New Zealand, and that's certainly cold. And anyway, this day started off like any other sort of, there's a few different call outs, but it's quickly escalated to just out of another level, really. In my role, we would see, unfortunately, a lot of urban wildlife like skunks and racoons and coyotes, the odd deer that succumb to different diseases that they would catch, whether it's distemper, which is one of the main ones. Not too much that you would come across as being rabies, but certainly distemper and some other conditions up there, to name a few. But on this particular occasion, I got called out to a raccoon. And if you've been to Canada or North America, raccoons look cuddly and cute and really, really, and you get close to them if you threaten them or if they're not well. Holy, they are scarier for me, they're scarier than a big cat. Raccoons, they have this god-awful, blood-curdling scream that they can do as well. And this animal, unfortunately, was highly suffering really badly from distemper. And we use the pole nooses. You've seen them occasionally use them with dogs, and we use them just from a safe distance. We could secure the head and absolutely move them. Unfortunately, with distempered raccoons, they're picked up like distempered skunks, which I'll get to in a sec. But this call out was, it was 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, just another, it's another raccoon. Unfortunately, gets poled. secured, put into a transport cage in the back of my car, and I'm going to head back to the veterinary department at the rescue centre, at the animal centre there to get it looked at and treated if possible. Otherwise, unfortunately, they get euthanized. But it's better that than suffering. Sure enough, within a half hour after heading back, get another urgent call out. A lady's called up the animal centre and has said that she's got 2 skunks in her house. And if anyone knows what skunks are like, I mean, you get sprayed by a skunk, you are not getting it off for a long time. Like people's dogs get sprayed by skunks, and it is the most god-awful, pungent smell you've ever smelled in your life. Anyway, this lady had 2 of them rolling around in her house, and unfortunately, skunks are primarily nocturnal, so coming out in the nighttime, just like raccoons, and through the day, is not normal. So straight away, alarm bells go. Oh my gosh, okay, how am I going to get 2 skunks running around someone's house of all places? Sure enough, tight basement unit, trying to get this pole in there. Anyway, you happen to secure these 2, and of course the pressure on my sweaty armpits, just thinking about it. Trying to get these skunks without getting sprayed is one skill to certainly learn. And this lady who was screaming at me got these skunks, got them into the van as well. So you can imagine I have a raccoon in there that's very aggressive, 2 skunks that are spraying the entire van. I'm sure they sprayed the raccoon. So I've got a van smelling of skunk. Have you ever smelled skunk?
No, I haven't, but I don't know how to find that on Google.
Yeah, it's just an experience you have to go through, I guess. And then, so I'm getting them in there, and then I get called to one of the local hospitals, and in behind the local hospitals, another urgent call that day, and this must have been just after lunch, an urgent phone call about a fawn, a baby deer, that's been attacked by a coyote, and it's had its tail bitten off, and part of its leg has been chewed, and so it's bleeding quite profusely. Now, trying to catch a little baby fawn that's scared, that's petrified, injured, running in and around the compounds of the back of a hospital proves to be quite interesting. So you can imagine all these people running around with nets and blankets, and I would have made for a pretty entertaining. Get your popcorn for that one. But we managed to secure this fawn finally after running around for almost an hour trying to catch him. Poor guy. Stopped the bleeding. He ended up sitting shotgun with me in the front seat because I didn't want him anywhere near the skunks. He wasn't as bad as the skunks and the raccoons. So I've got this fawn. Never got a photo, but I got a fawn in the front seat with me, cruising down all the way back to the animal centre. So you come back with, it's almost like Noah's Ark a little bit, and with 4 wheels, and you shoot back. Long story short is, unfortunately, the skunks and the raccoons all had to get put down, but the fawn was able to be saved, and we managed to patch it all up and release it back into the same bush area. Mum was waiting there, so good old Bambi got saved. But just towards, again, the end of the day, I get a phone call about a dog, a Victorian bulldog, that has attacked its owner and savaged his arm and put like 60 or 70 stitches, I believe it was. I didn't actually see it was all bandaged up, but he said about 60 to 70 stitches in it, which was like, holy. And this dog was now on the loose, had jumped its fence and was on the loose in a very highly populated area, like a neighborhood. And so having to call colleagues to come by, and when you have situations like that with dangerous dogs, you really, you need all your senses. And after a pretty harrowing 4 hours, I was like, oh gosh, how am I going to do this? A couple of Red Bulls later, and we managed to corner this dog into an area. Any kids playing on the streets, that was kind of our job, is get inside and stay away. And we had the police involved as well. But we managed to secure this dog after quite a bit of running around. It was dark by now. It's still minus 25 degrees and still really cold, really, really cold. I'd say that would be a day when everything's gone to absolute anarchy, really, for me, in the day in the life of a wildlife control officer.
That's but you did everything that you could, and I mean, we need more people like you, Avi.
What you can't. I'm just a small fraction of the amount of amazing people out there. I'm just one.
And what a missed photo opportunity. That's what I'm crossing out.
Yeah, can you imagine? There's Bambi riding in the front seat.
That's right. Just hanging out.
So it has nothing really to do with CITES, but I guess, around a day when everything went to custard. That's it.
Cooler than my work stories, I'm not going to lie. What's something that you wish more people knew about CITES?
Look, the biggest one is that it exists, that there is this international convention that exists, and it serves to protect, plants and animals and their populations in the wild that are being affected because of international trade. And it's not just, and I guess the other big point about CITES is it's not just about live animals and plants, raw products. It's really also highly manufactured things as well, items and goods that are highly manufactured, where you've got to turn your minds to when you're moving items and goods, medicines, things like that, across international borders, or more specifically here into New Zealand or out of New Zealand, that they may contain protected plants or animals in them. You really just need to do your due diligence and check and be a responsible Kiwi, and to ensure that if it does or potentially could, that you're asking the right questions, and trying to seek the right information, so that you don't contribute to the illegal wildlife trade in some way, and that you're trying to do things in the most responsible and sustainable way that you can.
How can someone help you and your team do your work?
How can spread the message that there is this convention, and that thousands of species are protected by it, and that it's really important to check if you need any permits or documentation before you look to buy something weird and wonderful online, or ask a family member to bring traditional medicines over into New Zealand with them now that the borders are opening. Or if you're looking to go on a tropical holiday over to one of the Pacific Islands, please check before you, if you decide to pick up a souvenir like a clam shell or some, coral off the beach, or some earrings made of turtle shell, just know that you need to check that you might need a permit to bring them back into the country, or you could face, further penalties. And
you can check on the DOC website. Is that right?
Yeah, the DOC website, we have specific CITES web pages. It's doc.govt.nz/CITES, which is CITES. So, yeah, the take-home message, think before you shop. Everybody plays their part. Really, we're not going to be able to protect all these species globally if not, everyone doesn't do their part to ensure that they make sure everything's legal.
Avi, you have such an important job that is one part in preventing the decline and extinction of so many species. I think you should be incredibly proud of what you do. Thank you so much for teaching us about it all. I feel much better prepared for a trip overseas, or even when I online shop. So thank you very much for being here.
Kia ora, Erica. Thanks for the opportunity, and a big shout out to the rest of everyone that works in this space within the department.
You're all superheroes.
All wildlife warriors, yeah. Kia ora.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Erica Wilkinson, and this has been the Doc Sounds of Science podcast. This show is available wherever you get your podcasts, or you can stream it off our website, doc.gov.nz. This podcast is produced by Jane Ramage, with sound and editing by Laura Honey. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and show our hard-working guests some love. Ka kite!